There are certain movies that scare the bejesus out of me. And probably not coincidentally, they all involve Jesus. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's my Southern Baptist upbringing from years and years ago, but movies that involve religion just terrify me. And if there's one thing that I hate more than musicals, it's horror films. So naturally, our guest today, Mikki Brock, said, hey, let's do The Witch, which we actually have a history of here at HAT. It was actually the very first horror film we did way back in October of 2018. And it's actually a phenomenal film to talk about history, talk about religion, talk about colonial history, talk about, well, what Mikki and I get into about these questions over like what the supernatural is, right? We look at the supernatural, say, of course it's supernatural because it's not real. And I think that at the heart of things, what Mikki and I get into today, especially she talks about this, is this idea that, of course, to these folks, witches were real. They were very much part of the natural world. And this movie today is such an incredible film. Like I said, it scared the crap out of me. I had to go back and watch it again. You're going to hear us get into this film and a whole bunch of other things. So you should know a little bit about our guest today, Mikki Brock. I am a long-time fan of hers. I started following her on Twitter years ago. And she's actually a historian and professor of early modern Scotland. And she teaches and professes, I guess, over at Washington and Lee University in Virginia. And I thought for certain when I asked her to be on the pod because of her ties to Scotland, she'd say something like Braveheart or something else. And she's like, no. We're going to end up beating that to shreds. We need to do something else. She's like, we're going to do The Witch. I was like, shit. Okay, fine. We're going to do The Witch. But it's perfect because she actually teaches about the history of religious belief and identity, intersections of Protestantism and supernatural. And as you're going to hear today, maybe the history of the Transformers. Guys, this episode is more than meets the eye. Sit back and relax because The Witch is next on Historians of the Movies podcast. Hey, Mikki Brock, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, we were just talking before, like I was thinking, we're doing The Witch today, and I swear to God, for like the last hour, it has been just nothing but full-on thunderstorms here. Like,
I mean, coincidence? Who can say? Who can say?
I don't know, but I have to tell you, like, I was talking to you, like, and I know a little bit about your work and stuff like that. We've been friends on like Twitter for a while.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to you, I was like, okay, when I asked you to do a movie, I was like, all right, cool. She does some Scottish history. All right, she's totally going to say like Braveheart or something like that. And then,
yeah, you thought I was going to pick like Mary Queen of Scots.
Oh my God,
like,
yes. And then you were like, I know
it's on that.
Oh, I'm sure you do. But then you were like, let's do The Witch. And I'm like, son of a bitch. God, The Witch, we did that. That was the very first horror movie we did on HATM like 5 years ago. And it scared the shit out of me. And so I purposely avoid, like, I swear to, I'm a full-grown adult man who could very capable of defending himself. And I sit here and I watch these like horror movies, and I'm just like this the whole time.
So did you rewatch it? Did you rewatch it for this?
Yeah,
okay. How did you cope? Did you have your new puppy with you?
No, okay, so that puppy, like that puppy is actually my ex-wife's puppy that I like.
Oh,
I was
no.
Like, oh yeah. So here's the weirdest thing. So my ex-wife is like, oh, well, it's funny. We're going to talk about demonology, so I thought this would be a great time to talk about in-laws. But
nice. Or I thought you were going to ask me if I had spells or something.
Oh, no. But like, so for those people who haven't followed this story of Violet is this brand new little French bulldog that my ex-wife got for our younger boy. And of course, like, give me pictures of that dog, Christine. I want to see those dogs. So I'm like, because we actually adopted two dogs together over the last year for like as a sign of whatever. And I'm like, here's $5. I now have like a stake in this dog. Therefore, I can call her also my dog. She's like, this is not fair. I'm like, look, you're an attorney. You understand how this goes. So yeah, she's adorable. Like, she's super, super cute. And I'm telling her, like, when you drop off the boys this weekend, can you bring the dog? So
bring the puppy. So what I'm hearing you didn't have a dog next to you to comfort you while watching The Witch is basically what I'm hearing.
Named after Blackbeard.
I don't think cats are comforting, especially not when you're thinking about witchcraft. Like, they have real witchy energy, cats.
Yeah, right. Oh,
I
yeah, maybe.
mean,
Yeah, maybe you could talk about like We'll get into this, sorry, but there's got to be all kinds of like leakages to. Well, hell, an animal takes very real center stage in this movie, right? So it's like there can be
absolutely.
like links to supernatural and under the way we understand animals. Obviously, like we think about like Egypt and Egyptology and all that, and like cats obviously well known for like their links to other worlds. I don't know how to say this like in a way that won't offend someone who's been alive for the last 5,000 years as an Egyptian who's just maybe walking around us. I don't know, but yeah, no, I've got Edward. His name's Edward Teach, and I also adopted him, and he's the most dog-like cat I've ever seen, but it's like he's too much up in my business. He like wants to be. I'm like, dude, I am trying to be afraid
Yeah.
right now with
Yes.
my I went to my kid's bedroom and grabbed the Spider-Man throw blanket, so I'm sitting there on the couch doing this the whole time. So
Okay. So
yeah,
I'm excited to hear about this because you find it scary. I have shown
terrifying.
The Witch in lots of different classes. I teach a class on Puritans. They watch it. My witch hunts class, they watch it. I'm teaching a class on the Salem witch hunts in the fall. They're
Oh my
obviously going to
gosh.
watch it. And my students, they're always, I kind of say, oh, it's not a typical horror film in that it doesn't use like cheap jump scares. It's a very sophisticated sort of atmospheric film. And I tell them that I don't find it scary, but that may be because I am so desensitized to being fearful about this stuff.
Movie,
I
and I want to know
know,
how
I
you
know.
teach it here in a second. So,
Well, I'll tell you, listen.
all right. So before we get into everything else, maybe we should start at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
For our audience who has not met
I?
you yet, who are you, and what would you say you do here?
Yeah, so I'm Mikki Brock. I'm an associate professor of history at W&L University in Virginia. I work on a whole range of things. So I always joke that what I teach about is often things that go bump in the night. So I have a class on history of the devil, witches. I just taught a spring term class on the history of ghosts, which was very fun and kind of different for me. But I also do like quote unquote normal history. So Scottish history, British history, whatever. And my own research, my first book was on belief in the devil in Scotland after the Reformation. I'm currently writing a book about sort of religious communities and identities in 17th century Scotland. I'm editing the Rutledge history of the devil in the Western tradition and write a few things about witches here and there. Yeah, I know, right? Like Satan's a big topic. But
he's kind of a big deal
about it. He's kind of a big deal. Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting because down here in Florida, we've got a guy announcing for president tonight. Maybe a little bit, but I don't know.
Make Satan great again. What can I say?
You know what? We're gonna get this podcast canceled before we even get going. I have to ask you: do you use film in all your classes?
I use it in most of them. So, for example, in my ghost class, I showed the Sixth Sense, which I don't. I use the Sixth Sense because it really teaches well because it basically encapsulates a lot of various ideas about ghosts, what they do, the traumas that they represent, and so forth. But yeah, I mean, I think essentially every class that I teach, I show a show film.
Yeah, it's like, well, I mean, the whole argument that I've come to understand the last few years with this HATM thing that is completely spun out of control is like so many people have like come to understand the past through film, pop culture far more than, than books and such, right?
Well, and I will say that a lot of early modernists, so I'm an early modernist, are sort of reticent to use film because they think that it doesn't accurately capture the, certain aspects of a given period. And I'm not really interested in playing fact-checking gotcha with films. It can be a useful exercise, but more, my question is, how is the film portraying the past? What does it leave out? How does it represent a modern interpretation of what the past was or could be? And what questions does it raise for you? And I think I've actually even taught, in classes where I'll show, a film on Elizabeth I at the, second day of class. And basically it will be a starting point to ask my students, what do you want to know? What do you want to know about what was accurate or not in this film? And it's a great jumping off point, right, to really analyze things.
Yeah, I always found it's like really interesting. The idea is like, what decisions are being made around this whole idea, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Why are we even talking? In fact, like, why are we even talking about the colonial era at all on screen in 2015?
Yeah, totally.
Like,
that's
what
right.
brought this here?
Yeah.
Right? I have another, before we get going, another really, really important question to get at you, I
Yes.
think you know is coming. Coke or Pepsi? What do you got?
So I am from Texas, so I would like to say that I don't even everything is a
Oh,
Coke, right? It's very
okay.
important,
Yep.
Jason. You know about this. You call things Coke, right?
Absolutely you
And you
do.
could want a Dr. Pepper, which actually is my beverage of choice. I'm a Dr.
Because
Pepper
you're from
person
Texas.
because I'm from Texas, but I would still call a Dr. Pepper a Coke.
Totally. No, absolutely.
You know,
Everything is
okay,
a
yes,
Coke, unless it's a Pepsi,
everything's a
which
Coke,
is trash.
which is trash. I agree.
Dr. Pepper is my fault. Is like, if I go to a place and like you have Coke or Pepsi, it's always the first question I ask. And they're like, Pepsi. I'm like, fine, I'll do a Dr. Pepper. It's my safe. It's my fallback. It's
I
good.
love a Dr. Pepper. I love it. What can I say?
No, it's fair. It's fair game. I love Dr. Pepper. It'll work. Although right now I'm drinking a Mountain Dew Zero Coke right now because
Okay, there you go. That's my road trip drink.
a
You
Mountain
get
Dew.
caffeine. Yeah,
Oh
I don't
yeah.
know why. Yeah, it's like
Can I tell you?
it's very
I
exciting.
have been on a mission to actually expose mellow yellow. I'm like, it's harder to find mellow yellow. I'm like, mellow yellow
Bringing it
is
back.
smoother than Mountain Dew, and people are like, what the? Why does this matter to you? And I'm just like, it does.
You're a man with a cause.
Something, I guess. I don't know. All right, so I came to you about doing this movie, about doing this podcast. I'm so glad to like sit down and talk to you. And it's like, all right, so what movie do you know? And I'm thinking, all right, Scotland, blah blah blah, and you're like, freaking witch. Why the witch? Why are we talking about this movie today?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because I am not an early Americanist, although I teach about sort of transatlantic Puritanism. So, and certainly I would think 17th century American history, particularly if you're talking about sort of New England, can broadly fall within the remit of the early modern world, right? So I have an expansive vision of this.
Right.
But why the witch? So, if I came and said I want to talk about Braveheart, it would basically just be me talking about how much I hate Mel Gibson for an hour, which nobody wants
So
that,
you say
right?
you'll come back for that?
Yeah, I'll come back for that. I have a lot of notes on Braveheart. Got a lot of notes.
Okay.
Or I could talk about the new Mary Queen of Scots film that came out a couple of years ago, which is
Mhm.
interestingly done. But both of those would probably end up with me saying, and here's what was wrong about the movie, and here's where, and again, I don't think that's the best way to engage with historical
I
films.
think it's kind of
But the
boring.
reason
Yeah.
it is boring, but the reason The Witch, why I chose it is a perfect film to my mind, in that it gives you such an incredible, unusual window into 17th century mentalities in a way that I've never seen ever in my life. I mean, you really feel like you are there on the edge of the wilderness, engaged in this sort of anxious fever dream about the
Mhm.
forces of evil, right? And it really, for me and for my students, it helps expand their ability and my ability to imagine what sort of the colonial project was like, and what
Totally.
the Puritan project was like. And it just does it like no other. So I love the movie.
We draw these lines about, like, say, European, colonial Americanists,
Yeah.
things like that. But these religious concerns, I don't know, are divided geographically, are they? I mean, these are the
No,
same
they're
folks,
not.
just kind of separated by some water.
I think that's right. And I think if we're talking about sort of Reformed theology,
Hmm.
Calvinism, right, and the ways in which it provoked all sorts of spiritual anxieties, even if ostensibly the idea of predestination is supposed to be comforting, it wasn't in practice in a whole lot of ways, especially when you're on the edge of the wilderness in a very sort of real way. And I think actually the way the film plays with the idea of the wilderness, be it the spiritual wilderness or the
The
literal
unknown.
wilderness, is also really profound. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's I come at this from a completely different angle. Obviously, my background is indigenous history and early America and things like that.
Yeah,
And what I found when we first watched this a few years ago, and then coming back to it, was just the sense of the unknown, this real
absolutely.
terror on the part of someone who is in an area they don't understand, both physically and maybe metaphysically.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Boy, this is a really disturbing film because the tension is there.
Yeah, and the soundtrack, it's incredible.
Yeah, Robert Eggers is really good at this. He's really good at
Yeah, he is.
framing these things. Did you see his newest film with Skarsgård,
I
where
haven't seen it.
it's a take on Hamlet, I believe it
Yeah,
is, and it's dark and it's foreboding, and it's got
yeah,
Anna
yeah.
Taylor Joy in there as well.
Okay, I'll have to. It's on the list.
You talked about early modern. what is the early modern period? When we talk about like periodization in history, does early modern apply only to Europe, or does it apply to the Americas? Does it apply to Asia? Like, is it a place? Is it a time? Is it a vibe? What is it?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I'm kind of reticent to say it applies to sort of American history writ large, because I think that's sort of the imposition of a European schema of periodization on a sort of entire place and space that was for so long dominated by non-Europeans. And I think it's sort of
Mm,
important to note that. But what it means in sort of my nomenclature, 16th, 17th century, that's the heyday of early modernity. And obviously the film is taking place in the 1630s. And I think that is during the sort of first initial major wave of Puritan migration. The Pilgrims, of course, had come over the decade prior in 1620, but this is the first real move of people away from England. Some of them actually would have gone via the Netherlands first, but usually straight via England over to the sort of so-called New World, but the early American colonies. And the reason I like the 1630s, why it's such an interesting time in which to situate a film, is because of the profound levels of anxiety and chaos that were going on in England that are sort of the tremendous push factor for these Puritans who are going to the East Coast, to what is sort of ostensibly imagined as sort of Massachusetts or whatever in the film. They don't name the location specifically, but it's New England, right?
it's cold.
It's cold. It's just such a ripe time of turmoil. And the thing about early modernity is it's this moment in which people are rethinking fundamental assumptions about the world in some really profound ways, and ways actually that were often very much driven by the project of colonialism, by the project of exploration, by the project of what becomes oppression and repression of various groups. And so the Puritans are fascinating this way because they, of course, are fleeing what they perceive to be oppression in England by Charles I and Archbishop Laud and all of that. And then they, of course, become the sort of agents of oppression in various ways in their own context in New England. So it's just such a rich, complex period. So it's a great subject for a movie. And you actually see that. I don't know if you caught at the beginning of the film, there are two indigenous men who are walking in as soon as the family's leaving the town where they've been banished from. They're within the walls of the sort of city, or the gates of the city, and that's an interesting allusion at the beginning to sort of the colonial project that's underpinning this whole film.
I'm wondering about the belief in supernatural. These Puritans, what's going? Are they bringing these? Are these beliefs in, say, the sutra? I guess, are they supernatural? Like, we see actual witches in this film. So I'm trying to figure out the correct terminology here. But I wonder, are these concerns about the supernatural amplified by the colonial experience? Is this something that's going on? Like, what? How are these
Yeah.
concerns about witches and otherworldly beings manifesting themselves, like here in Massachusetts?
So first of all, right, these ideas about witches and about Satan and all of that, I mean, that has been brewing in Europe
Brewing.
from really the early, yeah, brewing literally from the early 16th century. The witch hunts, they start in the late 15th century. They're ongoing through the 16th century. They really reach their apex in continental Europe in the second half of the 16th century and in the early 1700s. Early 1600s. And all of which is to say, when this film is set in the 1630s, when the Puritans are coming over to Massachusetts, there's already been this really long, rich, tragic history of witch hunting that's taken place in continental Europe and has also touched England and, to a greater degree, Scotland as well. So they're coming with all of these preconceived archetypes of a witch, what a witch does, who a witch is in league with, all of that. I think it's undoubtedly clear that these concerns, these fears, these worries about the forces of evil are amplified by this experience of being in the literal wilderness, right? I mean, these are people who left everything behind for this radical experiment to go, build as Winthrop would have put it, right, city upon a hill. I mean, obviously
Mm.
he was in it for economic reasons as well, but the goal, and of course the Puritans are coming over for a whole range of reasons, religious, economic, political, otherwise, but the stakes are so high, right? If you think you're God's elect, God's chosen, you better get it right, because if you don't, then maybe it's a sign that you're not. So it's a tremendous level of anxiety, I think, that's going on at the time.
Are these fears, do you think, of, like, say, the supernatural witches? I know we'll talk about demonology in a moment. Like, are they even more so than like the idea of do the Puritans believe in a hell? Is what's going on in their own understanding of like heaven, hell, the realms,
Yeah.
all in between?
So they definitely believe in hell. They do not believe in purgatory, right? That's been aggressively jettisoned with the Reformation, which actually has some interesting implications for belief in ghosts and things, but that's a whole nother tangent. But yeah, they certainly believe in hell. But here's the thing. This is the key thing for anybody who's not as like weirdly interested in Puritan theology as I am to understand. Is that these folks, I know people are always like, you seem so cheerful for someone who's really into Satan and Calvinism and whatever.
Like, that's because I'm really into Satan and Calvinism.
I mean, it gives me life. What can I say? But the fundamental premise of their belief system is that, you know, God is entirely sovereign. He's interventionist. He's omnipotent. He's in charge of everything. And he has preordained prior to the creation of the world who is saved and who is damned. And that is a decision that's God's alone. It's irrevocable. It's ultimately unknowable, although you can, through your own sort of experience of faith and conversion, perceive what you imagine are sort of the fruits and seeds of justification and sanctification in yourself. This is very in the weeds, but basically, you know, if you feel like you have faith and that God is sort of leading you and in you, then that could be a sign that you are the elect. And certainly these Puritans felt called by God to come and be part of this godly project in New England. And they certainly saw actually things like their economic prospects as bound up in that. The implication that this has for the supernatural then, right? They think these decisions are decided, right? They're going to heaven, they're going to hell.
What will be, will be. Okay.
Nothing they do on earth matters, right? What will be, will be. So the big sort of there of this is interventions from the devil are not going to drag you to hell, right? That decision's been made. Instead, God allows the devil and witches and just the horrors of the world to happen to you as just punishment for your sin, right? As a sort of test, as a really sort of something that's the product of man's total depravity at the fall, right? So it's a very sort of hard mentality to understand in some respects, but they believe it entirely. And the film captures that perfectly, right? With this, you know, Caleb, after Samuel is taken in the movie, says, is he in hell? Tell me, is he in hell? He's asking his father. And his father says, we can't really know. You just have to pray. It's up to God. You just have to pray. And, you know, the kids unbaptized, but they didn't actually think that baptism, it's a sacrament, but it's not efficacious in getting you to hell or heaven or not, right? It's just an important piece of it. So, but imagine the anxiety of this. And if the devil is tempting you, if witches are abounding, is that a sign then that God has forsaken you? Is it a sign then that maybe you're one of the reprobates? And if you really want to act like the godly, you better get on it. You better start combating this stuff. So it's a deeply, a historian once called it a piebald mentality, right? The world is sort of really black or white.
This guy sounds like a first-rate bastard, I just have to say. And I come from like, you know, I come from a very, you know, similar background. As like I grew up Southern Baptist, right, where it was.
Yeah, so did I.
Oh, you did? Okay, cool. Right?
We
It's
have
like,
a club.
yeah. Oh my gosh! Like, did I ever like? Do I know about hell? Everyone was going to hell. Those Church of Christ folks over there, they're no, oh my God, right? Like in a small town in Western Kentucky, gee whiz, those things were very real. I want to ask you about this. What about the world's animals? Like, we have a goat takes very center state. Like so I'm rewatching this movie. I'm like, who is the star of this movie? Right? Is it the father? Is it the mother? I don't really think it's the mom. It's not the twins. It's not the baby. I think Anya Taylor-Joy is ultimately the star. But I'm looking at Black Phillip going, is it you?
Yeah, there's definitely. Do you want to know why Satan is the goat? Like, what's the goat Satan situation? Okay.
Are we going to go all the way back to the early tennis? Like, why does like the goat show up in like these images of?
I can spare you those.
No.
Although I do know the answer.
For first-time listeners, we're going to spoil Christianity for you here on Historians.
Yeah. Oh, well.
If you've never heard of Christianity,
yeah, right. Buckle up. Buckle up, buttercups. We're going in.
Get ready for the emails with Mikki and Jason.
Yeah.
So all right.
Wouldn't be my first rodeo, Jason.
Oh my God. Oh, I do want to ask you about like your percent, like the feedback you get in class when you teach this. But Yeah, hit us with the abbreviated. We probably can't cover all 2,000 years of goats in Christian tradition. There's your next class. Why is Satan a goat? Like, what's the deal here with
Yeah.
Black Phillip?
So there are a couple of reasons they think that this is this is the case. One, there's this idea of sort of the demonization of pagan ideas about figures like Pan and others, right? The sort of that's a clear. I mean, a lot of what early Christianity does is basically take pagan things and either steal and adapt them to Christianity or demonize them, and also in some ways steal and adapt them to Christianity.
That's not really any different than like most other religions that spread, right? I mean, a lot of other religions kind of adopt.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the case. Although I think the sort of transmuting this really rich, diverse sort of pagan system into monotheism has a particular effect. But anyway, I think it's partially
ruining Easter for me now. Every time I look at a rabbit,
well,
I'm like, why aren't you a goat?
Well, we talk about the rabbit.
What movie. Goats
it's also
eggs?
Scary AF, right? Briefly.
Really? Yeah. Okay,
yeah, there's a rabbit cameo. Anyway, but so that's part of it, the sort of demonization of this pagan figure of Pan. But also, of course, there's that sort of biblical metaphor of separating sort of the sheep from the goats, right? The sort of elect from the reprobate. It provides a useful metaphor in that way. So I also think that is really sort of part and parcel of why the devil is often portrayed as a goat. One thing that's interesting in England, it wasn't very popular to sort of have and own goats during the 17th century. They're kind of destructive creatures. There wasn't a lot of room for them. It basically, you had a goat if you were, lower down the sort of social ladder.
Really?
But in New England, it was good to have a goat because goats could help you clear land, right? They're just like human trash compactors. So it's interesting. Apparently, the actor who played William, I read about this after the film came out, got actually attacked by and put in the ER by the goat. Charlie was the name of the goat who played Black Phillip. And they like battled. It's all legit in the film that he's actually wrestling this goat.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't have a goat story. I had a pig almost try to take off 3 of my toes one time when I was visiting with someone once, but I guess that's a whole other.
So there is a route that I run sometimes, and there is one yard, and they have a fenced like front yard. This is kind of out in the countryside in the Shenandoah Valley, and there is a goat in that yard that looks exactly like Black Phillip.
Really?
And every time I run by, I'm like, don't make eye contact. Don't make eye contact. But I think animals, your question about what's the role of animals within this broader supernatural sort of schema, I think in England, there's this sort of rich tradition of animals being witches' familiars. This isn't something that shows up in like witch beliefs on the continent, but it's very common in England. And scholars aren't even entirely sure the reasons for that. But the idea of the witch's familiar, of course, is that they suckle on a witch's teeth, that they drink the witch's blood, and that kind of feeds them, and they do help her do the devil's bidding, right? But actually, if you look at Europe as a whole, there are lots of beliefs that witches can what's the word am I looking for? Transform.
Yeah, into an 18-wheeler and fight the Decepticons.
Exactly, right? I think
obviously.
Obviously, that's what witch lore is going to look like in 2100, right? It's going to be like the witch transformer edition.
And then a yellow Camaro from God showed up. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But anyway, you have lots of ideas that either witches can transform into animals or that the devil himself or demons can transform into animals. So in Scotland, for example, a lot of appearances of the devil in the witchcraft records are as a black dog, for example. Like that's how the devil was kind of wandering around. So it's animals really, they loom so large in the European imagination because they're so necessary for survival, but they're also kind of uncontrollable in some ways. People are still navigating their relationship to animals, and it's actually a really exciting area of historical research for early modernists is thinking more about this.
Yeah, I want to say I remember reading broadly about like there would be these like mass like exterminations of certain animals during religious fervor, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
Black dogs, cats, I don't know.
Yeah, there's a really good book that's so teachable. I really recommend it by a historian called Darren Ulrich. and he's a wonderful historian, but the book is called Strange Histories. And the subtitle is something about basically all the weird shit that went down in medieval and Renaissance Europe, essentially
Right.
the subtitle. But he talks about, a pig being tried for
Oh, I've heard
crimes
of
of the
this.
witchcraft. Yeah,
Yeah, they
it's
hang
a
them, right? They hang the
yeah,
pig.
exactly. Yeah, so he talks about that trial. He talks about werewolves, and there's some really interesting werewolf stuff. So I definitely think it's definitely worth reading, and it's very, very teachable. Students love it.
Okay, I actually want to ask you about students. These classes have got to be super exciting, like for students to come to these. I have to imagine filling these classes are not difficult for you. Like, what's your student responses? Are students coming in to say a class on witches or demonology with any kind of preconceived notions of what they're walking
Yeah,
into? What's going on here?
it's so I'm at a small university, so professors have kind of a reputation. So I think part of it is, even if they're uncomfortable with the idea of the devil or whatever, they usually know me. So there's some
Sure, there's a
sort of level
trust
of comfort
level.
there. Yeah. Okay. So it operates differently in the different types of classes. So in the witch hunts class, everyone and their dog wants to take a class on witches. Like witches are hot right now. They're very, um, and so students really are interested in that. I think also in some ways because one of the things that happened with the last administration is the sort of revoking of the rhetoric of the witch hunt, right? And I think it's useful to actually think about, what does it mean when someone claims to be a victim of a witch hunt? How is this sort of operating in popular parlance? What's the history of that? And actually, in the Age of the Witch Hunts class, we kind of start there, and we talk about the language of the witch hunts during um, the 1950s, during all these sort of various iterations of, because it has a long history. The witch is and the witch hunt is such an evocative archetype. Even if we think we don't know anything about witches, we definitely do. You ask anyone on the street, tell me about a witch. They'll tell you about a witch. Or what is a witch hunt? They'll know what it is, but they won't know the history behind it. So I actually often really think it's useful to start with the present and then kind of work our way back, and then to return to sort of witches in the popular imagination, and also the resurgence of sort of Wiccanism and modern pagan practices that have kind of been part of this almost reclaiming of the label witch in some really interesting ways. So the witch hunts class, they're here for it. They're ready. The students love it. History of the devil is a little bit of a different beast, shall we say? Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
it's because I think witches kind of exist in this sort of supernatural realm. They're subject of Hollywood films. Everyone's seen Hocus Pocus, which I love.
You can have a
These
good
sorts of
witch.
you can have good witches, and it's these students have been raised on Harry Potter, right? They're all, they have this idea. The devil, though, for I think probably the majority of my students, is still a very real entity. Maybe they think of the devil symbolically. Some of them certainly think of him in a very real way, as a sort of embodied way. And often when you start exploring the history of the devil, you challenge some core ideas at the foundation of Christianity. And that sometimes students, we have a very open dialogue. I ask them at the start of class if they're nervous about the material, if there's anything they want me to know about their own background. And we just open up sort of dialogue on that, because it can be difficult when what they're hearing in my class is not what they heard growing up. And I just try to meet them where they are, and to recognize that we're all bringing things to the table there. And I also do ask them to recognize that this may be a case where they need to compartmentalize the way they think about the devil, right? They need to engage with the devil as an academic scholarly idea in my class. And that doesn't have to impinge upon the way that they think of the devil within the broader remit of their own faith, right? They can have that. I'm not speaking to that directly, but they may need to figure out how to compartmentalize those things if they can.
Do Christian notions, and I know that we talked a little bit about how Christianity, its development over time, borrows a lot from paganism and things like that. I'm wondering, the Christian devil or any of these other supernatural creatures, are they present in other forms in other religions? Are we seeing that as well? Or is there a big bad at the boss level of life in other religions?
Yeah. So I think monotheism in particular, and particularly Christianity, relies on And I should say I'm only really a scholar of Christianity, so I'm going to answer this as that's my specific knowledge base. Um, I think every religion has certain ideas about evil, but what Christianity does is it needs the devil as a big, bad, all-consuming evil in order to really demonstrate the goodness of God, the majesty of God, the goodness of Christ. Right? It's function. It's operating in this very sort of dialectical way, while ostensibly not slipping into dualism or any of those sorts of heretical ideas, right? You can't give too much power to Satan. He's broadly under the remit of God, according to strict Christian ideas. But I think Christianity really operates, along these axes of inversion, right? You need the light, you need the goodness, but in order to have that defined and amplified, you need to have it sort of bound up in this negative self-definition of what it is not. And people define hell as absence from God. If you look at so much of Christianity, it's all rooted in this sort of oppositionalism, this sort of black mirror concept. And that's why the devil is really functional there. The devil of the Old Testament is all over the place, right? The devil of the Old Testament isn't this like one singular major adversary to God. He's one of many, right, within the sort of divine court who can do God's bidding, torture Job, whatever. It's really not until the New Testament where there's a really explicit attempt to elevate the role of the devil as the role of Christ is being elevated, right? It's really explicit if you compare the Old and New Testament. So, but that's destabilizing for students. Like there's no coherent narrative of Satan in the Bible. There's just not.
He's transforming, perhaps. I don't know.
He's transforming.
Much
Satan,
like our ideas as we move forward. Yeah, exactly. All right, kids. So when we would talk about today's Megatron and why Jesus Christ.
A satanic reading.
I started this podcast with this level of being here, and we have just bring it on down.
That's like me over the course of the semester. I'm just making honestly, so much of my devil class by the end of the term is just talking about demon sex, because that is at the core of so much of this stuff. And actually, even in The Witch, there are these sort of sexualized undertones, but it's at the heart of a lot of this. And my students,
interested. Right.
By the end of it, though, they're like, oh, I always like to teach at 8 a.m. And they're like, it's 8 a.m. It's a little too early for demon sex.
Oh my gosh.
I can't be talking about the devil's cold member until I've at least had a coffee. Like, Professor Brock, you have to rein it in.
You guys are desperate for Cuban coffee up there. You'll be wired awake and then ready to talk about getting down in Helltown. I don't know.
Getting down in Helltown. New title, new subtitle for my class.
Good. My mission here is complete. I have a question though. We talk about, you talk about you've I'm going to cry now. I'm laughing so hard. Talk about assigning this film. For these kinds of books, what do you assign as far as readings go? I'm assuming lots of primary sources. What kind of secondary stuff is out there? What do you? How do you guide How do you guide Professor Brock? How do you guide someone to hell?
Well, yeah, and cue the emails.
Oh my gosh!
No, so first, let me say, if I have genuinely some books that I would encourage people to pair with The Witch specifically that would really go well with the film. So Malcolm Gaskill has a new book called The Ruin of All Witches, which is about kind of a lesser known witch hunt in the late 1640s in Springfield, what was at the time Springfield, Connecticut, now Massachusetts. But it's a witch trial in Puritan New England before Salem, right? A good 50 years before Salem. Salem, 1692. This is, 1647-ish. But it's a microhistory about this sort of one really interesting sort of witchcraft paranoia. I wouldn't even say paranoia, but rash of witchcraft accusations and fears in this community. So Ruin of All Witches, Malcolm Gaskill, it's really well done. I think what he does really well in the book, and what the best witchcraft historians do, is take seriously early modern mentalities, right? He doesn't try to explain belief and fear of witches as being about anything else, right? The witch hunts were about fear of witches. That's what they were about. It wasn't some cynical Porters versus Putnams thing. That's often how it gets sort of explained away with Salem, for example. Nobody was tripping on poison rye. None of that was happening, right? This was about genuine belief. So Ruin of All Witches does that really well. And I'm always trying to assign my students things that basically get them to understand that this was a serious belief system.
People really believed in this.
They really believed it. And that's what The Witch captures, right? It's not some aberration, right? This was a serious topic. Study of demonology, of witches. People really thought about it. So I also really love, there's a historian at Salem State called Emerson Baker whose work is phenomenal, but he wrote a book called Storm of Witchcraft, which is about the Salem witch trials. And I think it's the best book on the Salem witch trials. And it also pairs really well and teaches phenomenally to students. Marian Gibson has a new book coming out about like the history of the witch hunts and 13 trials that I'm really excited about. I haven't read it, but her work is really exciting. So I probably will assign that in class. Brian Levac has a really great source book of primary materials, but he has really good introductions to them. So he was my doctoral supervisor, so I have to give that plug. And also The World's Loveliest Man. But his work is really good. So, I mean, there's just so much that I assign to my students. The witchcraft scholars are a really generous bunch, and they've done a lot of really exciting work in the last couple of years.
Can I ask you what piqued your interest in this originally? Like why?
Yeah, like why am I?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, so I should say, I mean, more of what I've worked on in my scholarship has been belief in the devil. And of course, witchcraft is a part of that. And I'm now sort of working on some various projects that touch on witchcraft. Witchcraft is part of my book. But the reason I'm interested in the devil and witches, and why just like all the weird shit that I'm interested in, basically, the reason is because I think growing up where I did in Texas and in sort of a world in which there was, to me, it struck me as a child, like a very narrow path or a narrow window of appropriate belief. And I always chafed against that. I always had questions. I
Sounds
always
very
wanted
similar.
to, yeah. So I always wanted to know. And I think I was almost drawn to reading about kind of occult things, not as an act of rebellion. And this was more about my community rather than my family specifically. But I just always had questions. And so I was always that kid who was going to the library and checking out books on werewolves and witches and ghosts and whatever. And I think the supernatural, what you really are studying when you study it is the humans trying to make sense of things that are hard and tragic. Humans trying to make sense of the mysteries of their own lives and of trying to sort of engage with the world as they experience it. I think that's one of the things that's really important here. People knew about the supernatural in the early modern period because they believed they experienced it. And there's every reason to take that sort of seriously. But I think I'm just really interested in sort of the mess of human belief. And I like topics that are messy. I'm not interested in like, what are the top 3 causes of the First World War? Like, that's a useful question, I'm sure. But I'm interested in things that are messy. Like, why did people believe this? I'm not interested in what was really going on in question, but I am interested in what belief does, right? And why it really matters. And so I think I think I was always maybe interested in what my own beliefs did. And this was a, attempt to engage with that.
No, it absolutely makes sense. Like why, and now I'm just like thinking about, the role of religion and supernatural. And I remember I flirted around with, being an anthropologist when I was in undergrad, and
Totally.
And I remember taking some courses on voodoo growing up in part in Louisiana. It was present, and that was really 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 interesting. Did you ever see the movie Serpent in the Rainbow?
No, I haven't.
Oh my goodness!
Is it good? Okay.
Deals very much with voodoo and so forth. So it's it came out, I don't know, 80s, early 90s, something like terrified. Man, somebody would get on here like, I don't think that movie is very good. Well, neither is Con Air. So let's talk about movies that are good.
Okay.
I was thinking about this. Obviously, you said you work with film and demonology, which is just study. Are we talking demonology? Is this werewolves and vampires? What is this?
Yeah. So demonology, if we're using kind of if we're using a strict definition, it's literally the study of demons and the devil, their nature, their actions, their spheres of influence, their relationship to God, to man, that sort of thing. And it was a serious field of academic inquiry from the late medieval period through the early 18th century. I mean, people took this really, they wanted to know, right? How are the demons and the devil operating in the world? Which is actually a totally sensible question to ask if you believe in these things, right? I mean, it's also a period in which people were asking, things like, if people are going to hell, where is it? And how many bodies can you fit down there? And do people defecate in hell? What about in heaven? If the bodies are burning with the fires, how do the fires keep going? Do the bodies go fully burned away or not? And if the demons are down there, how come they don't burn? And these questions seem to us to be, and this is something Darren Ulrich talks about in some of his work too, they seem kind of naive or childlike, but actually they're good questions to ask. If you're going to believe in the afterlife, why not ask the question, right? Why not really try to puzzle it out in a deep and thoroughgoing way? And that's what the project of demonology was.
These are questions like my 11-year-old would ask, and I will give him credit because he's far more intelligent than I am. Because they sound like very like, okay, so all right, so there's a hell. Let's construct it. Like, what are the real physical manifestations of it? How does it operate on a very real level? Like, what kind of test alcohol, gasoline are they burning there? Are they running like 93 proof? Or are they going 80?
Yeah,
Like, I don't know.
I mean, but these are the questions people wanted to know, and so. Yeah, I think so. Demonology is engaging in a lot of these things. Or if you believe in the devil, right? Demonology is about how does he act? What's his relationship to God? Is he totally under the control of God's will or of divine permission? Why does God permit the devil to do certain things? I mean, all of those sorts of questions are embedded in this. And for Catholics, right, they really thought the devil had the ability to tempt man away from good works and thus away from salvation. But so for religious confessions across the board in Christianity, demonology was a really serious subject. And they spent a lot of time thinking about, like, did demons or do they have like corporeal bodies? And the consensus was they didn't. Like, the devil and demons are incorporeal, but they could borrow human bodies to do their bidding, which is why there's so much demon sex happening. Right? Because there's this idea that, they could tempt people by assuming human form and borrowing some semen from some dude, right? There's a lot of thinking about,
and this is before Luther Vandross started even like recording albums, when there was like nothing to like get
listen,
it.
Yeah,
this
right?
is before Marvin Gaye. This is they just had to like set the mood. When the mood strikes, like Jesus Christ.
I know. I mean, it's fascinating, but so demonology, it's related to witchcraft, because the main way that people in the early modern period thought the devil, or one of the main ways they thought the devil could sort of wreak havoc in the world, was vis-a-vis witches, right? That's where witches got their power. Witches entered into a pact with Satan. They went to a Sabbath, all of those sorts of things, which I think is sort of displayed in the film in various ways.
Well, getting back to the film at the very end, the daughter, right, strips down. I mean, there is a very
spoiler alert.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Right. This movie's 8 years old.
Yeah, people. Listen, I agree. You have a year. You have a year to watch it, and then no more.
I see people talk about like, oh, you can't talk about this on Twitter. I'm like, look, if you don't want to be like spoiled, don't go to the place where the conversations are.
I totally agree. People are like this about Succession, and I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, I wasn't going to be like, you got to watch it. You got to stay up on the stuff. Anyway, okay.
All right. No. We're going to get into Succession because all those people are going to hell. I'm confident. Okay. It does feel. Getting back to this, people are like, weren't you guys talking about a movie? Yeah, it's called Transformers.
Demon semen all the time. Like, that's what it's all about.
Demon semen. The Witch 2, Demon semen. There is witches do seem to have a sexualized aspect to their nature, right? I mean, does this not challenge maybe the chastity of a good Christian? Is this part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that often in early modern communities people were really fearful of was sort of the potential for unbridled female sexuality, unbridled sexuality in general, but particularly women's sexuality. And I think there is this very fundamental idea from the very beginnings of Christianity of women being especially vulnerable to the devil's temptations, to lust for the devil, to carnality. And to me, that's based on like the way that Genesis 3 was spun, right, of thinking of the serpent as Satan and women as being complicit from the beginning in the downfall of mankind. But anyway, there's a lot of anxiety about what women are doing with their bodies and where and whatnot. And I think witches were often quite sexualized. I mean, when people envision the demonic pact in early modern Europe or in the sort of early modern British world broadly, they thought about sex with the devil as this key moment of making a deal with Satan, right? The sort of typical script of the pact in a place like Scotland, for example, is a woman meets the devil on the crossroads or meets the devil, somewhere. The devil comes to her at night. They have intercourse. Then she becomes his servant, right? And then goes to this demonic Sabbath. So sex is totally at the sort of core of this. And I think you can read anxieties about witchcraft as being related to anxieties about sex and sexuality. That's not all it was. I mean, there's so many different layers to witch belief, but I think that's there. And there have been some really interesting kind of feminist readings of the end of the movie, which is not what I think the director was trying to do. Actually, I think he was literally just trying to like show this fever dream about witchcraft that was happening in the minds of these Puritans, right? But people have read the end of that film as being this moment of Thomason being freed, right? Being awakened, being powerful. I don't think that was the director's intention, but I'm not sure that matters, right? It's an interesting sort of take on what happens at the end of the movie, that she gets the opportunity to live deliciously, right? As the devil sort of invites her to do.
Well, we're talking so much now about like sexuality and sex, demon sex, and all those. I actually wonder about how are same sex relationships? Are these addressed by onlookers at the time, or is this addressed within the framework of people who are thinking about witches and witchcraft and religion?
Yeah. So not in the terms that we would think of today. I mean, one of the challenges actually was studying the history of with studying queer history at large is that so much of it is sort of unspoken, is within all of this coded language. What I can say with regard to the witch hunts, though, is often because of the way inversion was at play, when demonologists wrote about the types of sex that would happen at these Sabbaths, they would say it was indiscriminate, it was unnatural, man with man, woman with woman, basically doggy style. They have all these like very lurid descriptions of like sex positions that were considered unnatural, bestiality, incest, whatever. Sometimes I really shock my students with some of these like primary source texts where
they're going in thinking they're reading a bunch of prudes, and they're getting very descriptive.
They are, yeah. And but again, I think you can read those things as a way for writers to express norms about sexuality by articulating what the types of sex the devil might be doing as a sort of an inversion of what was appropriate. And so you can probably read into that some thoughts on forms of sexuality that might have been considered deviant.
I want to ask you about one other thing before we talk about movies, which is this. And this is a thing that I have absolutely no understanding of. And I've wondered about it from time to time. Actually, I don't know any of this. I've wondered about physical, what we might consider, say, physical ailments or things like that, how they may have been seen as like, and I'm thinking about maybe someone with a stutter or someone with maybe physical, maybe someone would say Parkinson's or something like that. What we might understand. Would people have seen someone with let's say physical maladies as being touched by the devil or something like that? How do people? How do people see people with autism or who are on the autism spectrum in the 1600s? Is this also being viewed through this lens at all?
Yeah. So again,
can we pick it up in the archive?
Yeah, it's a difficult challenge, right? Because there's a lot of reticence to like read modern diagnoses onto the past. I mean, I think it's clear, for example, that there are women who are experiencing postpartum depression, postpartum syndrome that end up, doing things like just having erratic behaviors or, even in some cases infanticide. Actually, I think probably some of that is underpinning the stories that are happening, but it's hard to sort of read those definitively onto the past. I do think, though, that what we can say pretty definitively is often external difference was viewed as a mark of divine judgment. And I think not always, but that could be the case. And certainly that could be the case with something like, various forms of something like leprosy, for example. And this is a medieval story. It's not new to the early modern period. What is interesting and what is relevant to the witch trials in particular is this idea of the devil's mark, which is not something that's in the movie. That's actually really the only part of the film or the only sort of piece of the archetype of the witch hunt that's missing from the movie is this idea of the devil's mark, which people in sort of reformed communities were really obsessed with. This idea that when someone became a servant of the devil, when someone made a pact with Satan, they received his mark. And that was sort of a mark of servitude. And what this looked like in practice could be a mole that was kind of unusual, could be a strange birthmark, could be a third nipple or a scar that didn't
Mark Wahlberg
properly.
is in league with the devil.
there are so many possibilities. And one of the things that happened, like in Scotland, for example, I've just been writing about this in one of my book chapters. During these witch hunts, over the course of the sort of late 1650s and early 1660s, they would hire basically professional witch prickers. That was their term. And they would walk around with these sort of pins that they could fold out. And they would look and investigate to see whether or not an accused witch had a purported mark of the devil. And the thing about these marks is that they were supposed to be insensible to pain. Now, if you've ever had a scar that didn't heal properly because these people were not getting stitched up neatly by surgeons all the time, you lose sensation, right? And they would prick the accused witch, and if it didn't bleed, if there wasn't pain, that was seen as sort of near enough definitive evidence of witchcraft. And that's, I think that's one way that sort of physical markers of difference potentially could be sort of incorporated into this broader sort of remit of the witch hunts. Although I will say most devil's marks were not something that people knew about before they were searched. That is to say, they usually came about through someone already being accused for reputational reasons, and then they would be stripped down, sometimes their head shaved. It's tremendously brutal stuff in a culture that valued modesty.
I want to ask you about your 3 favorite films related to the. We'll open up to the supernatural, so that you can cover vampires. With are you on the terms of the vampire Lycan war? Which side are you on? Is an important thing to decide.
Definitely vampires. What We Do in the Shadows is one of the best shows ever made. If the listeners to this, and if you haven't watched it yesterday.
I have not.
Oh my God! So there's a movie, but the show is hilarious. It's about all these vampires who live in Staten Island, and they live in this like crumbling old house, and it's the most hilarious show. It's such a delight. You have to watch it. What We Do in the Shadows. The TV series.
All right, I'll find it.
It's on Hulu. So that's a TV series answer, but I love it. It's so good about vampires. It's right, hilarious. Basically, think about Schitt's Creek as vampires.
Okay.
No, honestly, like
I'm down.
But in Staten Island, rather than like wherever the hell Schitt's Creek is supposed to be, right? Like 10 out of 10.
They're trying to figure out how they're going to move to Florida because everyone down here is from from one of the 5 boroughs.
Is that true? Wow.
We call it South Florida. We call it the 6th borough. I mean, that's just like they're like it's too sunny. We can't move down there because of the whole vampire thing.
Well,
we'd love to move down. It looks great. The fishing is terrific, but
Yeah. Well, anyway, everyone has to watch it. It's so funny. So I think, what movies do I really, really like about the supernatural? I still, and this is why I assign it in class on my history of ghost class, I still really like The Sixth Sense. I think it's a really good, have you seen it? Ages ago, We Absolutely. See Dead People, Sixth Sense. And it's a very thoughtful movie in the way that it thinks about ghosts, about grief, about the sort of trauma of loss, about the sort of threads between the living and the dead. Now, to me, when I rewatched it, I thought the twist at the end was very obvious, but my students were still, it holds up. I think it's really, I don't know if it's the most well done movie, but I love it anyway.
Sure.
So I think,
and they all know going in when they watch it, right? Like I remember when Ghost came out, they didn't. Because it's old to them.
Yeah, they didn't know
they're the youngs.
They've never seen it. They're the youngs.
When did this movie come out? Like in 96, 98, somewhere?
Yeah, it was like late 90s, like 98, right around there. 98, 99. They weren't even born. They weren't even born.
They don't even know things.
They don't know anything. They know many things, but they don't know about that. So I really like that film. Another vampire movie, Let the Right One In. It's a Swedish vampire movie, and it's really well done. They have an American version too, but the Swedish film is really, really good. What else do I really like? I actually, you know what? I'll say it. I love the original Hocus Pocus. It is goofy and not especially accurate, and I just love it. I can quote the whole thing start to finish. I watch it every Halloween. I've seen it a million times. 10 out of 10. Love Hocus Pocus. It's goofy, but I really like it.
Can I tell you, when I was a little kid, The Wizard of Oz scared the shit out of me.
Really?
To this day, I think back. I have tried. Like I can watch Wizard of Oz now, but I specifically remember how terrifying the Wicked Witch of the West was. Like, absolutely. 5 years old, scared the crap.
I loved that movie as a kid, but isn't it about the gold standard or something? What's the movie an allegory for? I can't remember.
I
Something
think
19th century,
so.
maybe
It's
early. I don't know.
Maricopolis
Early
or
20th. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that time
no one
period
cares about
after.
history, right? No one's trying to
I,
link movies to history.
well, I don't know. I was trying to remember what it was about. No, but I love that movie. That movie, I almost don't
Yeah.
know that I consider it supernatural, although obviously it is.
Are aliens supernatural? I was just thinking of this. You were talking like we think
So
about like
here's actually what's interesting. In the period that I study, like early modern, only God is supernatural. Like only that which created nature can be above it. Everything else, all these other things are
part of the
preternatural,
world.
right? Yeah, preternatural because they're engaging with nature. You don't need to know that terminology. I think it's kind of interesting that now we
Well, there's a
use
test later, right?
supernatural as sort of parlance for things that we no longer consider to be sort of normative belief, right? So we say it's supernatural. Nobody calls God supernatural anymore. I ask my students about this, like, is God supernatural? And they're like, well, no, because he's real, because that's what broadly they believe. And so it's to me, it's really interesting how we've started to use the language of supernatural as a way to sort of categorize anything that's a maybe, is a big question mark about existence, or that maybe is beyond sort of belief. But aliens, yeah, I mean, I think they're broadly within the remit of how we talk about it in popular parlance.
Well, we got to thinking about like one of the things that makes this movie so good is that it really channels the fear of witches
Yes.
because it is believed that witches are not super. They are real. They are part of
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah.
They are a danger. They are a threat.
Absolutely. Yeah. And at nowhere in the movie does the director wink at the audience, right? At nowhere in the movie is he like, oh, we all know this isn't really real. In fact, it's a film that's told entirely from the perspective of people who are deeply committed to these belief systems, right? And it takes it so seriously. And it makes, here's the thing that, that I really like about it is it's a movie about the history of witchcraft and about fears of witches that actually understands that witches were about, that theology was part of this, that religion was part of this, that all of these fears and apocalyptic angst were at the core of this. So that the witch hunts, they were not about everybody tripping on some poison rye, right? Which is one of those myths that won't die. They were not about rival families falsely accusing each other or whatever. It was that witch hunting was really about hunting witches because people were scared of witches, right? And I think because it takes that fear seriously and builds that world where you too see how they feared witches, it does it beautifully.
Well, that leads us back to our like maybe our ultimate our final question:
Oh,
is The Witch a history movie?
how do you define a history movie?
That's not my question. That's a question for you. How do you, Professor Brock,
Yeah. So
professor
actually,
of
yeah.
demon sex, right?
So
What?
yeah. Do you know, someone announced me once at a conference as like Mikki Brock, professor of Satan. And ever since then, I made a joke about it on Twitter. And then someone sent me a nameplate that said Mikki Brock, professor of Satan. I have it on my desk.
If you
I
don't show
was
up in like with like a black leather jacket,
also, number one, it gave me a promotion to full professor, approve, and professor of Satan. I asked my department chair if we could change my name to that on the website. I did get a no, but maybe soon.
that's what they would say to Satan. I think
Yeah,
is
well,
no. So
indeed.
maybe that's actually a reverse affirmative.
Well, there, yeah, inversion. It's all around us.
Yes,
No, but I think yes, I think it's a history movie. And the reason I mean, I'm not sure if I think or not, if I think that category is sort of useful or not. But
it's your choice. Yeah.
regardless, yes, I think it is because I think it is the best movie out there about 17th century thinking. It's the best movie out there about witches, best movie about the 17th century. It's absolutely, if you want to understand Puritan theology, watch the movie, right? I mean, it is bang on. And in fact, they use a lot of language from actual sort of Puritan texts. So, I mean, it is expertly done. When I watched the movie, I mean, I saw it in theaters and I could barely cope because I wanted to take notes on the way I teach it. I couldn't cope. And usually when I see a historical film, that's because I'm annoyed at how they portrayed one thing or another. But this was just because it was so beautifully done. It captures in a really profound way the very existential fear of what it was like to be in the wilderness in the 17th century moment where the forces of evil are operating from without and from within in ways that are truly terrifying. So it's so good.
That is a chef's kiss answer. That's perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Last question. Mikki, where can people find you in the world? On the Twitter sphere, anywhere else? Like, where do people find you?
On the Twitter sphere, I'm on there at Mikki Brock. Boring. I think that's my Twitter handle.
I assume so. I'll link it in there.
Yeah. I'm on
at
Twitter,
Professor Satan, right.
At Professor Satan. I do have a website that I don't really update. I extensively have one. But I have a new book that I'm almost done with. It will then have to go through another round of like clearance review, but I'm nearing the finish line on a book, and also on this Rutledge History of the Devil, which both of those will be out in 2024.
Do you have a name of the book yet?
I do. Yeah, it's Plagues of the Heart, Piety, Crisis, and Community in 17th Century Scotland.
That's going to have an awesome soundtrack, whatever.
Oh, yeah, right? Yeah, just...
Books need to have soundtracks.
If it was an accurate soundtrack, it would just be only psalm singing, which is all that the people in the book
Okay, maybe not as much that soundtrack.
It's all about like some pretty hardcore Presbyterians and, what they're getting up to. So
I'm thinking Bonnie Tyler, but, you can
okay, we can take it in a different direction. Yeah, but
Total Eclipse of the Heart. It's not too late.
Plagues of the Heart. Yeah, we could do it.
Absolutely. All right.
Okay.
Mikki, thank you so much for being here today. I've learned a lot about things I never hoped to learn.
Well,
we'll have to do this again. So
yes, definitely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, awesome.
And that's a wrap here at Historians of Movies Podcast. Thank you so much to our guest, Mikki Brock, for stopping in and talking all things colonial, religious, goats, and Transformers. Also demon sex. What was that about? Thank you, of course, to our producer, Fletcher Powell. You can find him on Twitter, Fletcher_Powell. Thank you, Fletch, for making this show run. And, of course, thank you, the listener. You, the listener? Thank y'all. I don't know. Hey, guys, thanks for listening in. You make this show run. You continue to make this go. So thank you so very much. Please continue to share this with your friends. Leave a remark, hopefully a good one, on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. Leave us some reviews here. It'll help the algorithms, whatever the fuck those things are. It'll help us get out to a larger audience. And continue to tune in. You can find HATM. You can find our brand new website, historiansofthemovies.com. And, of course, you can find me on Twitter at Herbert History and at the same thing on Blue Sky. So we're going to see if that works as well. Anyway, also, there's an Instagram page. You can find what list of films that are out there. And if you want to see a movie on HATM, please do let me know. I'm always looking for good new recommendations, something exciting to do. Folks, I hope you're having a great day. I hope you enjoyed the podcast today. We've got much more lined up for you. And if you want to hear a pod about a movie, also let me know. So thanks again. Talk to you a little bit later. Ciao for now. Bye.